This podcast includes graphic depictions of true crime cases and may contain explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and for today's episode, we are pulling out of our Patreon archives. Yes, this one was an early release episode that was published first months ago to our Patreon, and now we are making it available for you. So if you want other episodes like this, don't forget to check out our Patreon. That's patreon.com/We Saw the Devil. You can get episodes like these, postcards from around the world, merch, true crime gifts, and a variety of other things. So definitely check us out on Patreon. Also, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at We Saw the Devil, our website, WeSawTheDevil.com, and Instagram at We Saw the Devil Podcast. So we are going to go ahead and air this episode. Tonight, I actually, Robin, handpicked a special case just for you guys, because it's one that I've just been so utterly disgusted by for years. I feel like we cover a lot of crimes like missing children or, more generic crimes. And there are some really fantastical out there, like how in the world did that happen kind of crimes out there. And so I decided to handpick one for you.
I'm really actually excited for this one. It's different from everything we've done so far. This is more like the billboards you see on the side of the road when you're on a road trip and you're like, come see the thing. This is the thing. And this is part of like such a deep pop culture from Japan. And I'm actually kind of like excited to hear more about it because I'm going in this a little bit blind, although I know about him and I know about the culture a little bit more than like the typical person, right? So this is going to be a really like great examination of it.
It is. So if you saw on our Instagram, I posted a teaser picture of a pair of hands that were creepy as fuck.
They're real.
They're real. Those are, in fact, this gentleman's hands. And if you aren't aware of the case or aren't familiar with it, this is the case of the Otaku killer, or the human vampire, other people call him, or the little girl killer. He is known by all of those names.
None of that sounds like a good thing. You don't want those nicknames, okay?
No, you don't. This is the story of Tsutomu Miyazaki. And it's just heinously sad.
Let's do this. Let's get into the sad, grotesque, scary, creepy.
And I feel like the story time should entail you guys pulling up that Instagram or Facebook post of the hands and just staring at that as we talk about it.
Ooh, we need a little mood lighting.
Yeah, little mood hands.
Maybe to get ready for the creepy spirit fingers. Perhaps, if you're listening right now, I'm going to set the mood and let's just calm down for a minute and stare at those hands.
Okay.
All right.
So Tsutomu Miyazaki weighed in at 4.8 pounds when he was prematurely born on August 21st, 1962 in Tokyo, Japan. Now, getting off to a great start, he was the child of an incestuous sexual relationship between his father and oldest sister. So he was, in fact, born out of incest.
His name's not Cletus either.
He had a birth defect where his hand joints were fused together, creating long and slender Nosferatu-like fingers. So he could not bend his wrist upwards whatsoever. He just had the Nosferatu-like vampire hands. Now, it was shocking for many, and it led to him becoming a loner when he started school, as all of the other school children bullied him for his deformity. And at the age of 5, when a classmate teased him about his, quote, funny hands, he stopped showing them in family photographs out of embarrassment, which I can't say that I blame him on that one.
Right? Can you imagine the gloves he had to buy?
Special made.
Ugh.
Although he had no friends and wasn't involved in the Itsukaichi elementary school social scene, he was a great student, ranking in the top 10 of his class. He had dreams of becoming a teacher. And he blamed his deformity on not being able to successfully form friendships, play sports, or just have basically any normal social interactions whatsoever. So instead, he would stay up late at night and read comic books. And he just developed this huge affinity for comic books, superheroes, alter egos, and he would read and draw them.
Would he read manga? a lot? Is that something that's common in this one?
Yes.
Okay.
So his family was very well known in the city, as his father owned a major newspaper, the Akikawa Shimbun. It's in the Itsukaichi district of Tokyo. So along with that success came great political influence and wealth, something that Tsutomu's parents wanted for him as well. In their minds, he was the natural successor to the father's newspaper business when he decided to retire. Tsutomu had no interest in this and became very resentful of his parents, claiming that they did not care about his personal happiness. Later, after his arrest, he told an officer, if I tried to talk to my parents about a problem, they would just brush me off.
That's very common in like Japanese and Chinese culture, is that business is life. Business is what you do for your living is your prosperity and your livelihood. So for him to like basically deny a family business is a huge deal.
Yeah. Now, he had 2 younger sisters who hated him, but had a decent relationship with his older sister. But by all accounts, none of them were close.
I wonder why.
Right? This family was a family of strangers. So Tsutomu became the first student from his junior high school to get an early acceptance to Meidai Nakano High School. And that was a huge deal. He commuted 2 hours each way every day for 3 years, but eventually tired of the long commute and failure to make friends and social connections. So he instead withdrew to writing and reading comic books, it's kind of like the common thread in his life, it seems.
You know, like the guy who's like, yeah, that's like totally cool.
Yeah.
From The Simpsons, that's why I imagine.
That's more or less what he was.
Well, I want to know how he drove with those hands. Was he able to grab a steering wheel? Because he couldn't bend his wrist back. Could
right.
bend it forward?
He could bend it forward, but not back.
God, could you imagine being stuck in traffic and seeing those hands? No. I'd be in disbelief. I'd be like at a red light, and I'd be in disbelief. I would be like, "What? Am I seeing that right?"
Like, what's that? The TLC song, like, pull up on the passenger side of my best friend's ride, except I would not holler.
Yeah, you would.
I would.
Hey, how you doing?
At the end of high school, his dream of becoming a teacher would not be realized. At random, his grades plummeted and he went from the top 10 to 40th out of 56 students in his class. His plan was to enter Meiji University, which was affiliated with his high school. But by his senior year, his grades were so poor that he did not get the recommendation for university and ended up going to a junior college.
Oh, that's a big, bad deal.
Yeah, disappointment Grand Central Station for his family. And his family was, in fact, devastated and embarrassed.
This is like a dishonor to his family. This is literally like worthy of disowning him when stuff like that happens, especially since he like completely disemboweled the family business.
Exactly. And his father, though, at the time was more interested in going to dinners and gaining and touting influence in the latest technologies of cameras. His father was obsessed with cameras. His sisters found him absolutely grotesque. The only person at this point in his life that showed him any interest whatsoever was his grandfather. And they had a very, very close relationship. Tsutomu saw him as his father figure. Grandpa is a very important figure in this story.
Oh, no.
Naturally, what does a creeper do? In junior college, he decided to get a certificate to become a photo technician. And this is when odd behaviors began to surface. So while taking pictures for his course, he would take, quote, crotch shots of other female students. He would make hypersexual comments at random and became obsessed with pornography and pornographic comments. And this is when the lolicon movement was just starting to boom. Ugh. And I'm going to turn this over to Jackie so she can discuss it more. But first, what is lolicon? Now, the Japanese term derived from the English phrase Lolita complex. Lolicon is media, typically cartoons, of very, very, very young or prepubescent girls engaged in basically various degrees of erotic behavior. Think of the style of like the big baby eyes and the small frames that you see in some current animes. Yeah, that's the style, and it's basically drawn child pornography.
I unfortunately have a very like odd story about how I actually found out about that. That was even a fucking thing. So, more or less, I read a comic, like a web comic about a video game that I used to play, and in one of the web comics, the one chick that's in it, the main character, she had a screen name and it was LOL I Dragon. And I thought that's what it was, making fun of like, you know, just something silly and stupid. So I made that my screen name on PlayStation a long time ago. And I was like, okay, LOL I Dragon, funny. I'm stupid. Somebody messaged me and was like, so are you into Loli? I made a mistake of looking it up, being like, what the fuck is that? Like, random person on PlayStation Network that I probably ran into when playing the game. And I literally I physically retched. I almost vomited when I saw what it was. And I'm like, oh my God. And now I changed my screen name. Long story short, I definitely changed my screen name. And I was like, what in the holy, yeah.
Yeah. It's that style of like the big eyes on the little girl body, and it's a big thing. Even after graduating college, Tsutomu's life was not normal. Every single spare moment that he had was spent watching pornography or reading and drawing comics. He completely just left reality and put himself into this world of sex and comics. And he had no interest in forming real life bonds whatsoever, because not only was he ashamed of his hand deformities, he was not, quote, physically mature. And what do we mean by that? After his arrest, a classmate that he went to school with said that they shower during PE, right, and outdoor activities, said that Tsutomu's penis is no thicker than a pencil and no longer than a toothpick.
Ooh, boy.
So that potentially did a little harm on forming relationships, especially sexual ones, with women his own age. Regardless, by 1984, he grew tired of adult pornography and started solely searching for child porn. Why? Quote, they black out the most important part, he complained. Now, it's important to understand Japan's laws at that time. Obscenity laws at the time banned the showing of pubic hair, not sex organs. Because that makes fucking sense, right?
I think so.
Now, in 1999, and again, 1999, that's the year that production and distribution of child pornography became illegal. Therefore, child pornography in Japan was technically legal to possess until 2014, when Japan expanded on that original law from 1999. So back in the 1980s, during the time that Tsutomu was operating, countless loopholes and an utter lack of laws allowed him to obtain all of the child porn that he wanted. And that is disgusting.
That's not even... I just can't imagine anybody who literally would do that.
It was legal to create, it was legal to distribute, and it was legal to sell.
How fucking horrible.
Disgusting.
Yeah, no, like... makes me mad.
And looking back on interviews, right, like from people from the late 80s and early 90s, I looked it up in an article trying to understand the laws, right? They did a survey. One of the Japan ministry cabinets did a survey in 2002. At that point in that survey, 15% of Japanese men polled that they had seen child pornography, and 10% admitted to owning it outright.
What? That's such a high number.
Yeah.
That's so, like, one is too much.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
It was apparently a very, 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 very popular thing back then. Despite banning the production and distribution of it in 1999, Japan was the last Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development nation to make possession a punishable offense. So even though in 1999 they banned the creation and distribution of it, it was legal to possess it until 2014. And I did some research, and there are all these interviews with like everyday people from like the late 80s, early 90s that are like, don't violate our rights. We should be able to have child porn.
Excuse me?
And that was the absolute, at that time, that was the attitude.
Look, I understand cultural differences and stuff, but not when it hurts a child, okay? And that's not even a cultural difference. That's a fuck you. Ugh.
Yeah, it's fucking disgusting. Though he now lived with his parents and sisters, his pornography habit continued. Dissatisfied with his work and constantly berated by his parents for lack of ambition, he considered suicide. Probably would have done the world a huge fucking favor.
Sorry to say.
He confided in his grandfather, who helped him through the darkest moments. In 1988, his grandfather passed away, thus ending his last personal relationship on Earth. He later admitted to an attorney after his arrest that he wanted his grandfather reincarnated so badly that he began to consume his cremated bones and ashes.
No.
He believed
that's some My Strange Addiction shit.
Yeah. He believed that if any of his grandfather's body remained in the urn, his reincarnation would not be complete.
Oh, that's sane.
Right? And after his arrest, Tsutomu reportedly told investigators of this time, quote, I felt all alone, and whenever I saw a little girl playing on her own, it was almost like seeing myself. And at this point, 3 months later, he committed his first murder.
That's quite a jump. Quite a jump going from eating your grandfather's ashes to murdering somebody. Jesus.
Right? You know, and that's something that the police, and we'll discuss this later, but like all the signs were there.
Well,
so the first child to die at the hands of Tsutomu Miyazaki was Marie Kono. On August 22nd, 1988, one day after Miyazaki's 26th birthday, 4-year-old Marie Kono was playing outside in a park near her home in Tokyo. She had gone from her home in Iruma Village to play with a friend in a park. A Nissan Langley sedan quickly pulled up next to her, and a man rushed towards her. "Wouldn't you like to go somewhere where it's cool?" Miyazaki asked. Marie Kono nodded and took his hand. She played with the buttons on the radio while he drove towards the Shintama power station outside of western Tokyo. Once they turned down a narrow dirt road, Miyazaki stopped the car. They exited and walked a little ways down the trail. And this was apparently a very, very popular hiking trail for people. And he expressed to investigators after his arrest that he was very, very nervous about getting caught. And actually, he and the little girl passed multiple people on the way. Miyazaki then wrapped his snake-like fingers around her throat and strangled her to death.
No.
Mm-hmm. After undressing and sexually assaulting the lifeless 4-year-old, he placed all of the clothes in a pile beside her body and drove away.
Oh, come on.
Now, roughly at the same time as his young daughter was being murdered, around 6:30 p.m., her father called police to report that she had not returned home. Assigned as a missing persons case, police immediately began an investigation. And over 50,000 posters of Marie's face were put up not only all over Tokyo and surrounding villages, but across all of Japan. And this was a massive case at the time. Crimes against children in Japan are like almost unheard of in public, right? Like on media and whatnot. So when this little girl went missing, which was like nearly unheard of, it was big news.
Do they have a high crime rate in Japan? I don't think they really
No,
do.
they don't at all. This is why this was unheard of and like freaked everyone out.
Aww.
So
poor little girl.
Now, there had been, as I mentioned, this was a popular hiking trail. So there actually were 2 witnesses, 2 young boys. And they told police that they had seen Marie walking with a man by the river near the trail that Miyazaki had taken her. They described him as short, pudgy, in his late 30s with curly hair.
How did they not see his hands?
And they also described he was wearing a white sweater and pants. So they described him almost to a T. Now, a few days after Marie's appearance, her mother placed a plea for help in the local newspaper. She immediately, the next day, received a postcard in the mail stating only the words, quote, "There are devils about." Marie's body was not found, and by September, 4 weeks later, the investigation slowed almost to an end. On October 3rd, 1988, Miyazaki struck again. As he was driving through the Hano Saitama, he saw 7-year-old first grader Masami Yoshizawa walking along the side of the road. He somehow got her into the car, and the unsuspecting young girl was taken to the same hiking trail in western Tokyo where Marie Kono was killed. Using the same MO, he strangled Masami to death and then sexually assaulted the corpse. As rigor mortis was setting in, it startled Miyazaki. He rushed from the scene without moving or hiding her body, leaving her less than 100 meters from Marie Kono's remains.
That's what startled him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Masami was declared a missing person, but with no leads, the investigation slowed in its pace. The police naturally compared the 2 cases, but with no evidence, either by itself or linking them, further action was fruitless. Third murder. 2 months later, on December 12th, 1988, 4-year-old Erika Namba was walking home from a friend's house when Miyazaki spotted her. Miyazaki opened his door, grabbed her, and just threw her into the car. He took her to an empty parking lot in Nagore, where he immediately demanded that she strip. He took many sexually posed photographs of her before pouncing on the tiny girl and strangling her to death. He wrapped her body up in a bedsheet, tied it up, and placed it into the trunk of the car. He drove to a nearby wooded area and disposed of her clothing and body, but naturally his car got stuck in a ditch.
God, what an asshole.
Right? Can't even fucking park. A group of men saw his predicament and offered to help, eventually freeing the vehicle, and he apparently just fucking sped right off without saying a word. Erika's family reported her missing that same night, and yet another investigation commenced. So the very next day, due to 3 missing children in 3 months, that put an intense amount of pressure on the police. So a task force was created in an effort to find the perpetrator. The very next day, a local man found a piece of Erika's clothing, which led to a massive search party. and they found her corpse in the woods. The men who had helped Miyazaki came forward voluntarily and accurately described his physical features, but they gave incorrect information about the car that they actually helped him out of a fucking ditch with.
How can you not know what it looks like when you're like literally like touching it?
Right?
Well, that's kind of okay.
And it was estimated that they were there helping him for roughly 40 minutes. What? So they were with him in his car for 40 minutes, and they somehow gave police incorrect information.
I mean, I guess.
So that wasted a considerable amount of time and hindered the investigation because police started going basically through leads and crossing off people who owned certain makes and models of different vehicles, because apparently all three men remembered different vehicles.
What? How is that possible?
No idea, but that's what happened.
Weird.
So in the meantime, and this is just where it gets so beyond fucked up.
Oh, God.
So in the meantime, while grieving the loss of their child, Erica's family began to receive strange phone calls. Their phone would ring and they would answer, but they could only hear someone breathing on the other end.
Because that's not creepy at all.
And like Marie Kono's parents, Erica's too received a postcard. This one had letters clipped out from various magazines, and it spelled out Erica, cold, cough, throat, rest, death.
Ugh.
Now, not yet finished tormenting the family of his prepubescent victims, Miyazaki would go one step further. He returned to the woods and gathered the remnants of Marie Kono's remains and destroyed them in a furnace. He then made a present for Mr. Kono, her father.
No.
Early morning, February 22nd, 1989, Marie Kono's father found a box on his front doorstep. He brought it into his home and opened it. It contained several teeth, clothing, pictures of Marie, along with some of her ashes. And he called the police immediately, but they didn't believe it. They said, well, this just must be a cruel prank or joke. This can't be her remains. There's no way that she's dead. And that sadly gave Mr. and Mrs. Kono hope that Marie could have still been alive. And so they went on television again, begging for their daughter to be released. On February 11th, the distraught family received another letter. This one was sent along with a photo of Marie to reporters. The letter read, I put the cardboard box with Marie's remains in it in front of her home. I did everything, from the start of the Marie incident to the finish. I saw the police press conference where they said the remains were not Marie's. On camera, her mother said the report gave her new hope that Marie might still be alive. I knew then that I had to write this confession so Marie's mother would not continue to hope in vain. I say it again, the remains are Marie's. And he signed it Yuko Imada. And the name Yuko Imada was a pseudonym for Now I'll Tell. After the Kono family got the present, police obviously sent the remains to be analyzed, right?
Yeah.
So right after they received this letter, a doctor from Tokyo Dental University did an analysis on the contents of the teeth in the box, and they all eventually concluded that they were, in fact, from his daughter. So the Kono family finally had the truth and realized that their daughter was dead. So on March 11th, the Konos held a funeral for their daughter. Once they returned home, they saw a new letter waiting for them on their front door.
No, make it stop.
It read, before I knew it, the child's corpse had gone rigid. I wanted to cross her hands over her breast, but they wouldn't budge. Pretty soon, the body gets red spots all over it. Big red spots, like the Hinomaru flag. Or like you'd covered her whole body with red Hanko seals. After a while, the body is covered with stretch marks. It was so rigid before, but now it feels like it's full of water, and it smells. How it smells. Like nothing you've ever smelled in the whole wild world.
God, someone's gonna need therapy. Not him, the family, I mean.
And he again signed it Yoku Imada.
God.
Can you imagine?
No.
That made me want to cry. I'm like, oh my God, literally, can you imagine coming home and coming home from your child's funeral and then getting that letter from her killer?
I couldn't take it. I would be hysterical.
So his final murder took place on June 6th, 1989. So 3 months after the Konos had the funeral for their daughter. 5-year-old Ayako Nomoto was playing in the park by herself. Once again, Tsutomu Miyazaki coaxed her into his car with the intention of photographing and then murdering her. He quickly became really annoyed with the child and immediately just strangled her to death. He wrapped her up in a sheet, but this time, since his dumping ground had already been discovered by police, he brought her to his apartment, wrapped her up in a bed sheet, and tied her with a cord. He waited until night fell to bring her into his building and then spent the next 2 days photographing and sexually abusing the corpse.
No.
He later admitted that the only reason that he stopped is because of the smell of decomposition in his apartment became too great for him to handle.
Oh, so that's the problem, huh?
Right.
God.
He decapitated the body and then severed the hands with the intention of preventing all forms of identification. He decided to dump the torso in Hano's Miyazawa-ko cemetery in the middle of the night. And if you thought it couldn't get any worse, his depravity took another sharp turn when he decided to roast the young girl's severed hands and eat that. Later that day, he dumped her head and hands in the woods behind his home, but then he realized that that was too close to his home and too much of a risk. He returned to retrieve them 2 weeks later. He hid them in a bag in a storeroom behind his bedroom inside of his apartment. Later, he burned the hair, the clothes, trash bags, and the sheets, and he scattered the bones in the woods. On July 23rd, Miyazaki would make his last attempt. He approached 2 sisters who were playing in a park nearby and convinced one of them to follow him so he could photograph her. He started to request and take sexual pictures of one girl in front of her sister, but then her sister ran to get their father. The dad confronted Miyazaki, who was only partially clothed and barefoot.
What?
And apparently the dad beat the shit out of him.
Oh, God.
But Miyazaki got away. He fled the scene and hid for a few hours. And then his dumbass decides to return to his parked car at the park, and the police at that point were waiting in a sting. He was arrested and finally taken into custody.
Christ, finally.
Right? So when police searched his home, thousands of graphic videos were found within. Over 5,000 of them, to be exact. 5,763 pornographic videos. And he would soon be dubbed at that point the Otaku Killer. Because of the 5,700 videos, over 500 of them were videos that he secretly took of his sisters in the shower.
What?
Yeah, apparently he had been secretly videotaping his sisters for years.
There's something wrong with that family. Not necessarily the sisters, but there's something wrong with that family.
Yeah. Most of them were child pornography, and amongst them were tape recordings of him performing sexual acts on corpses, as well as the photographs and videos he took of the children when they were alive.
So sad.
He also had a massive collection of anime, manga, splatter films, and horror movies, which the media immediately latched onto and blamed for, and causing him to turn into the monster that he was.
Hence Otaku Killer.
Yes. That is why he's known as the Otaku Killer. And I watched a couple archive news reviews, right, and news reports, and they actually showed pictures and videos from his home. And he literally had, he had over 5,673 videotapes in a small ass apartment. And this was before, this is like 1990, right? So we didn't have like, say, a DVD, right? Or like terabyte hard drives. Those were individual videos.
Like VHS?
VHS. He had them from the ground up to the ceiling.
You know, there's in a lot of animes, they actually kind of do a cultural pick at it, like a pop culture pick to it. Mm-hmm. And they show like a lot of scenes where they'll be making fun of otakus, basically people who are shut-ins and do nothing but what he did, more or less. Not necessarily pedophilia or anything like that, but just people who are shut-ins and all they do is play video games and read manga and watch anime and stuff. So I think that a lot of the throws that they do in anime and stuff is actually referring to him a lot of the time, because it was so popular back then after this had happened, because it was so grotesque.
Apparently, and we can discuss that more at the end. That's actually a segment that I have because I did go down that rabbit hole. Okay. But yeah, the otaku at this point was kind of like the nerdy losers of society, right? Like they lacked ambition. They didn't want to do shit with their lives.
They failed out of school.
Right, they failed. And so because of the way he looked and because he had such a huge collection of anime and, he was a shut-in and so on and so forth, that's how he got that moniker. The trial started on March 30th in 1990. As a defense, he tried to blame his actions on his comic book alias, Ratman. That was his name. And if you Google Ratman, Tsutomu Miyazaki, you can actually see he just sat there in court and drew the whole time. And a lot of his drawings are on the internet, online. And he drew Ratman over and over and over again. He also, and the defense team, tried to blame it on the violence and sexual content found in some of his favorite anime. So his own defense was actually saying, anime made me do it.
Oh my God.
Now, another sad aspect to this is that his father felt so much shame and humiliation over his son's crimes that he disowned him and refused to pay for his defense attorney.
As he should.
In his local newspaper, his father was quoted saying, "It just wouldn't be fair to the victims."
But yeah, he created him through incest, right? Okay.
And his father eventually committed suicide in 1994. And when Miyazaki heard the news, he said it made him feel, quote, refreshed.
Ooh, that's harsh.
So the defense in this case revolved around him having a, quote, limited sense of responsibility for his crimes. And one of the defense attorneys said, "We want to build enough of a case for the judge to sentence Miyazaki to life in prison." So there were basically 3 different outcomes, right? If he was found not responsible and basically insane, he would go to a mental institution. The second option would be 12 to 15 years in prison. And then the third option is death. So his attorneys were basically just trying to build just enough to keep him from getting the death penalty. There were 3 teams of court-appointed psychiatrists from both Keio University and Tokyo University. All 3 teams came up with different conclusions regarding his mental state during the trial.
Not good.
One team determined that he had a personality disorder, but can be held liable for his crimes. And 2 others said he had a feeble mind at the time of his crimes. Both the district and high courts adopted the first report, saying that he does indeed have a personality disorder, but he should and can be held liable. One of the doctors on the case listed what he called a grab bag of obsessions: pedophilia, necrophilia, sadism, fetishism, and cannibalism. And another one of the psychiatrists believed that he was a pedophile first and a murderer second. He said killing was an extension of his interest in little girls, a way of possessing them. They filed their report, and Miyazaki was fully capable of taking responsibility for his actions. He was judged to have multiple personalities at the least and schizophrenia at the worst.
Kind of sounds in line with that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. His defense could not convince the judge that he was insane ultimately, and Tsutomu Miyazaki was sentenced to death in 1997. So his
good riddance.
Yeah, his trial lasted for 7 years.
Wow, that's
And in 2004, Miyazaki wrote to the editor-in-chief of Sakura Monthly Magazine, and he said, "I think I will be acquitted. I don't intend to apologize to the bereaved. I don't intend to apologize, basically, to the families." So he had absolutely zero remorse whatsoever.
What a sack of shit.
Throughout his time in prison, Miyazaki's defense team appealed his death sentence in both 2001 and 2006, but it stood. So at the age of 45, Tsutomu Miyazaki was hanged to death on June 17th, 2008.
Crazy to think that hangings happened in 2008 in Japan. It's hard to imagine.
But it did. And so he was sentenced to death, and that sentence was carried out. So yeah, what do you think, Jackie?
I mean, I just think that he's just he has such a creepy, I mean, can you imagine somebody who looks like him, who has schizophrenia and is literally going after your little girl? I can't imagine. You get all those messages and letters and then the remains on your doorstep. What a literal filth of a human being. I mean, I'm sorry. With no remorse on top of it, I think he absolutely deserved the death penalty.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, those families are never going to get their little girls back. And what a way to die. Oh.
And he was named the Otaku Killer. Again, that basically translates to the geek or nerd killer. And he is the first killer in Japanese history to be linked to nerd culture. And there was actually a cover story in Wired magazine's first issue back in 1993, and they actually discuss otaku culture. Basically, it's described as, quote, Japan's socially inept but often brilliant technological shut-ins.
He wasn't brilliant by any means, though.
No, he was, and his mental illness, obsessions, and fetishes.
They start to overtake him.
Perfect storm. And then plus being bullied for his deformity, apparently not only his hands, but his junk too. So
hence his drop in his rank from the top 10 to literally the very, very bottom of the barrel.
And the interesting part about this case is, so back when he was arrested, right, Miyazaki haunted and still haunts to some degree public perception of otaku, especially in the older generations, because this was such a sensationalized crime all across Asia when it happened. It's nowhere near as bad as it was now than it was back in the 2000s. Because the movement, otaku culture, has pretty much, wouldn't you say, Jackie, spread worldwide at this point?
Yeah, we have it here in America too, unfortunately.
2 other little interesting facts. He never actually displayed much concern. What's one piece of serial killers, right? One piece. It's almost, for some reason, almost all of them kill animals. That's one of the red flags, right?
Right, the lead up is that somebody is becoming so mentally screwed that they just think animals and finding roadkill,
Exactly. So, they included this in his defense, but he never, ever, 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 throughout his life, apparently displayed concern for life in any capacity. He said, quote, "I've killed cats, threw one in the river, did another one in boiling water."
Oh, my God.
He also throttled his own dog to death with a strand of wire.
Oh, no, I don't want to hear that.
And his defense team said that his absorption in the video game world and anime world, quote, removed his consciousness from reality. Everything became an item to him, including people. The little girls he killed were no more than characters from a comic book life.
Oh my God.
So this is, you remember Columbine, how they blamed all the crimes on say Marilyn Manson and music and whatnot? This is kind of Japan's big, it's the cartoons. They blamed horror movies, splatter movies, anime. They blamed all of it for the crimes, and it couldn't have just been mental illness.
Or the fact that, his mental illness would... come on.
I don't know if you guys have spent a considerable amount of time on Tumblr or anything like that, but Tumblr is notorious. It is a shithole of people who worship serial killers. So, one of the biggest, and Vice News actually does an incredible documentary on it, of the people who are, especially usually women, who are obsessed with the Columbine shooters. There's this entire, tens of thousands of people on there, community across the world, of people who are in love with and idolize the Columbine shooters.
Oh, no.
And so Miyazaki actually has that. He has a huge following in Japan of people who idolize him and consider him a hero. And it is, as you would imagine, basically the same type of people, similar to incels over here in America. Over there, though, they're into otaku, lots of anime, things like that. They literally view him as a hero. There have been a handful of copycats to him in Japan since his case became public.
Oh my God, I would hope not.
Unfortunately, the most notable one was Kaoru Kobayashi. He killed and murdered a 7-year-old child in 2004, and he said out loud he wanted to be the next Miyazaki. I mean, they idolize him. Miyazaki was told this, said, hey, this guy, killed a girl and said he wants to be you, and Miyazaki was, offended.
Offended?
He said he can't be me unless he gets a mental health evaluation done.
What?
Yeah, he was simultaneously, annoyed, but also liked the idolization.
Weird.
Yeah, it was gross. This is basically a case where the media blamed everything, anime, manga, video games, violent movies, and horror movies. Anything but his own action was at fault for this.
And did nobody actually note his childhood and his how his parents kind of handled him and stuff? Because that's important, because there's a lot of people who end up growing up like him, and their parents kind of put their lives in perspective, so they never go down this kind of rabbit hole, because there's a lot of people exist out there with kids like that,
Yeah. And another fun fact, right? I learned something actually while researching this case that I was not aware of. So there's a really incredible article as a whole in the online mag The Verge, and they talk with a gentleman named Patrick Galbraith. And he's an Alaskan-born ethnographer and journalist who spent over a decade studying otaku subculture from cosplayers and collectors. And he ended up receiving a PhD from the University of Tokyo. So more or less, he knows what the fuck he's talking about, right?
Yeah.
He said, quote, I wonder if people would accept in the US, after a mass murder, anyone saying, oh, I know why he did this, because he's a comic book fan. But then he immediately went on to note that Seduction of the Innocent, a 1954 book by psychiatrist Frederick Wertham, claimed that then popular, quote, crime comics promoted juvenile delinquency. So in the 1950s, right, there are a lot of like the crime comic books, you know, back in the day.
Yeah, the lesser, like the more narrow thinking people coming up with like answers to things.
And like crime, right? So like investigators and things like that. His claims, this, you know, Wortham's claim sparked an actual congressional investigation, and the resulting political pressure from that led to the creation of the Comics Code Authority. And this is in America. And it was largely responsible for the subsequent domination of superhero comics. You can actually thank the fucking superhero overload that we're experiencing now on this asshole psychiatrist from the 1950s who said that crime comics promoted juvenile delinquency.
So they became superheroes.
So they gave us superhero good guys instead of
True crime.
Or just crime in general.
Or like detective comics.
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. That apparently promoted juvenile delinquency, and now we are absolutely just like fucking dominated by superheroes because of it. So I found that to be super interesting, like a little historical piece. And arguably, though, if you look at our comic book scene, we still do not have the artistic variety that Japan has.
Oh, Japan has so much. And what's really interesting is that for some reason in a lot of the comics and stuff, there's more detail in the background than on the actual characters. Mm-hmm. And the characters are always like very exaggerated. A lot of manga and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you pick pretty much like any topic and look up Japanese anime or comics, like you will find a comic for it.
Oh, yeah.
Like hands down, period.
It's everywhere. Like it's a hard coded into the culture, you know? I mean, there's nothing really wrong with storytelling, you know, through art. It's just like, I just don't understand why nobody is talking from the true perspective of mental illness versus his upbringing. Like, you know, nature versus nurture is very important for somebody who has a predisposition for mental illness. Just because somebody has a mental illness doesn't mean that they're going to commit a crime. It doesn't mean that they're going to end up doing what he did.
And I find it really interesting, too, because a lot of killers that we discuss have terrible backgrounds, right? Like, absolutely terrible. If you look at, you know, Gacy or Richard Ramirez or, you know, various other people, they usually have such shitty childhoods. And by all accounts, he was born, as far as nurture aspect, right? He didn't get a lot of nurture or love from his parents. But he was wealthy. They lived in a large home. They had everything they wanted. He was going to university. He literally had everything. But
that can be just as toxic too.
Exactly.
And it sounds like it could have been bordering that as a way of abuse, like emotional abuse to him. You know, because it's a very cultural thing too to be very strict when you have a family business in Japan, or you know, in the past, right? Like the past, I'm sure future Japan isn't like that as much. But I know for a fact that it sounds like to me, right? It sounds like to me that he is mentally ill, you know, based on his diagnosis.
Well, I mean, let's start out from the beginning, right? He was he was born by incest. His father had sex with his own daughter. So he was born by incest.
Not normal. That's not normal, everyone.
And then I'm just going to go ahead and assume that because of that incest, he had a physical deformity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's common. That's why people shouldn't be breeding the same gene pool. I mean, beyond all the obvious other reasons.
Right. You know, and then he was heinously bullied. His family was terrible. You know, they were very strict, expected him to do this. They took away his choice in life. Then we have the physical deformity, apparently, of his genitalia, of his penis. The mental illness, right? So, I mean, it's just like the perfect storm for some heinous shit.
And that's what happened, you know? And it just sounds like it's not like his grandfather was his only connection to anybody keeping him level-headed, and once his grandfather died, that was it.
It was like, I'm often launched into space. I'm becoming a serial killer now.
I have nothing left to keep me grounded, is what it seems like. And so it seems like he went deep into his own brain and only wanted to see what he wanted to see, and his obsessions ensued from there.
It's an incredibly sad case, though. It was just really sad and depressing to research. But I handpicked that one because, you know, lately I feel like a lot of American killers have just kind of been beaten into the ground, overdone, over talked about. And so I've actually started just reading about other countries' serial killers that they have. So guys, thank you again for listening. Really appreciate your support. Wash your hands. Stay inside. Do not inject bleach into your body. Hand sanitizer. Jackie, do you second that?
Don't snort it either.
Yeah.
I just want to let you know, just snorting hand sanitizer, not cool, man.
Just don't do it, guys. Just don't do it.
Until next crime.